Okay, so I probably shouldn't have given Jodie such a long bio because that's basically what I'm going to talk about. So I've stepped into this role very last minute. Ben apologises, but he is extremely ill. If anybody knows Ben, he's an expert in this industry of genomics and he covers many disciplines. I'm going to let a lot of you down because I can only talk about beef, but I can talk about it well, so hopefully I can teach you something. And if there's something that I've learnt about genomics, it's that we can borrow things from other industries and learn from other industries. So hopefully there's still some takeaways. So genomics is the study of an animal's genes and mapping these genes to traits that we can measure and that we can observe, which is called the phenotype. So based on genomic breeding values, we can make decisions about an animal's actual value, their placement within a breeding program, and how we can best utilise their genes. The cropping industry is hundreds of years ahead of the beef industry, and the dairy industry is probably about 10 to 15 years ahead of where we are. So we're just starting to scratch the surface. But a lot of projects are going on and it's getting really exciting. So why is genomics important? Well, to give you an example from the dairy industry, what they started to do was that they were selecting for something that they could easily see and measure, which was milk volume. So continuously selecting cows and bulls to produce larger volumes of milk. Over years, their fertility dropped, and all of a sudden they weren't getting a calf a year. And we're seeing a similar trend in the beef industry. Particularly in the north, we've selected for growth and size, but we've ignored fertility. So much so that now a lot of the north would only expect 2 calves in 3 years. So what the dairy industry did, with Ben's help actually, is introduce genomic breeding values. And slowly they could correct this deviation with fertility whilst maintaining milk volume. And really that's what we hope genomics will do for the beef industry. So the Northern Genomics Project is the largest one of its scale, and it's looking at over 30,000 heifers that vary in origins from studs to commercial producers. And what we're doing differently is we're studying them all in their natural environment. So the aim of the project, as Jodie mentioned, is to develop a DNA test suitable for northern cattle that will give producers these genomic breeding values on fertility and temperament. This project's been constructed with a DNA test so that you can compare cattle across breeds, you can compare cattle within breeds, and you can look at mixed breeds and composite cattle as well. So the 2 primary traits that we're looking at in terms of fertility are puberty, or whether they've cycled or not by 600 days, and wet rebreed, or do they have the ability to fall pregnant whilst lactating. The third trait that we're looking at is temperament, which is particularly important in the north. So this project collaborates with over 54 different properties across Queensland, the Northern Territory and WA. And at each of these places, we go in at 3 points and collect data. So the first is an ovarian scan, then we do a pregnancy test after their first mating period, and then a second pregnancy test after their second mating period. At these times, we're also collecting data on weight, hip height, body condition score, and a few other ancillary traits looking at fly and tick scores and teat and udder scores. So to focus on the first trait that we do, it's an ovarian scan. So this is where we rectally ultrasound the ovaries. And what we're looking for is a corpus luteum or a CL, and that's one with the yellow arrow pointed to it. This is a structure that forms on the ovaries after they've ovulated. And apart from pregnancy, it's the only definitive way that we can say that a heifer has reached puberty. So at the same time as this ovarian scan, we take a tail hair sample, or it could be a tissue or a blood sample, and this gets sent away to our collaborating lab where it's isolated, amplified, and then adhered to a SNP chip. And that's an image of one of them there at the end. And we've developed our own SNP chip for this project called the Trop Beef 35K, which basically gives us 35,000 different data points on each animal. So this linked up with, at the moment, we've got 24,000 heifers that have both a phenotype and a genotype, and that's a lot of data. So what is it telling us? Well, based off what we've learnt phenotypically so far, is there's two big risk factors associated with whether a heifer will reach puberty. The first might be a little bit surprising. It's not about breed, it's about breeding. So that's to say that it doesn't matter whether you start with a Brahman or an Angus, it's the selection and the pressure that you put on those animals within your herd as to whether you're going to see good results or not. This is probably most evident within Brahmans. We've got Brahmans that are really, really early maturing and Brahmans that are really, really late maturing. So that's one thing that's been really interesting coming out of it. The other risk factor, which is probably quite obvious, is that weight contributes. So we can see that our average weight in terms of reaching puberty is 320 kilos. So to explain this graph, basically in the red, we've got animals that haven't reached puberty, green, they have reached puberty, and blue, they're pregnant. So if we look to when there's about 50%, which is about there, it's at about 320 kilos. So from here, this is collected from our 24,000 heifers. You can see that these girls that fall into this category, this category up here, the ones that are pregnant or cycling at these lower weights are your overachievers. They're doing really well and well above average, particularly these girls, they're super cows. But these girls are doing really, really poorly. So the girls that you have to get to 450 kilos before they'll even start cycling is just going to reduce your productivity and profitability. So what we also know is that the shorter they are, the better condition score they are, and the older they are, they're also more likely to reach puberty earlier. So to link this up with what we're seeing genetically is we've done estimated heritabilities on about 15,000 heifers so far, and we've come up with these three traits: weight, hip height, and whether they've cycled or not by 600 days. So these heritabilities, if anyone's familiar with genetics and genomics, they're moderately heritable, and getting these kind of results indicates that, well, it validates the work that we've done, that this single ovarian scan and the measures that we've got are actually producing good results. And the fact that these are moderately heritable traits means that selecting for them genetically, we can make an improvement, which is fantastic. So we haven't got as much data on wet rebreed, that's still filing in, and so is the temperament data. But we're working on a number of other projects linking in with that. There's actually a fellow that's discovered that the genes responsible for bad temperament in humans are actually the same genes that are responsible for bad temperament in cattle. So that's always pretty interesting. So basically, where can this genomics apply more broadly? Well, ultimately, these genomic breeding values will mean that you can accurately identify the best genetics in your own herd, and more importantly, the genetics that you should be importing into your herd. So an application of this in a breeding thing might be taking a tail hair from a calf, identifying that she has fantastic traits for fertility, and then you can enter her into a juvenile in vitro embryo transfer program, or JIVET. So this is basically where you go in, you ultrasound the ovaries, you aspirate the eggs, and then do IVF and embryo transfer. And so this can mean, which is exactly what this is a picture of, that they can have progeny on the ground before they've even reached puberty, which fantastically speeds up the genetic progress that you'd get compared with using traditional breeding and selection methods. So beyond the work of fertility and temperament, there's also a number of projects that are utilising this database. We're looking at the genetics of tick and buffalo fly resistance. There's also been investigations into disease relationships, so how the reproductive microbiome works with genomics and diseases like vibriosis, which is rife in the north. Ben's also been conducting a project on feed conversion efficiency. So this has been taking a subset of animals, putting them into a controlled environment and working out which have the better genetics for converting food. So this might have a widespread application into feedlots, where one day you might be asked for a tail hair before you send animal to a feedlot, and if they've got poor genetics, then you're going to be paid less. If you've got better genetics, you'll probably be paid the same. That's the way it is. So also very excitingly, Ben and his team are working on a crash-side genotyping test. So this is actually a picture of it here. It's being used in human medicine already in hospitals. What they do basically is they're genotyping bacteria in hospitals and identifying which ones have the genes for antimicrobial resistance. So Ben's seen the opportunity to apply this to the beef industry, and basically what he's creating is this crash-side test, so that if you're in a stud operation and you're branding calves, by the time you get to the back of the race and pull the tail hair, you can know whether that first one should be cut and sold as a steer, kept as a bull, or sent as a cull, which would hugely speed up the process. So genomics has many widespread implications throughout the beef industry, and the research that we're working on is really on the cutting edge of it. But the DNA test is in no way a silver bullet, and genomics relies on accurate information and a lot of it, and being continuously fed into the system. So one of the huge challenges that we've got to overcome is how do we keep this information up to date and continuously feeding into the system? Because if we base our genomic breeding values off the information we have today, then 5 years will already be behind the times. Dairy is obviously an industry that's dealt with this very well. They get information twice a day, every day. But a lot of cattle in the north are lucky to see a human once a year. So it's definitely a big challenge. So to wrap up, the Northern Genomics project is getting some really exciting and significant results. And there are a number of other projects that we're collaborating with and that complement this project. So it has an obvious application in breeding, in feedlotting, and disease investigation, but the success really hinges on that continual supply of information. Genomics with any industry is the perfect arena to collaborate and innovate, and so the whole industry can grow and improve and cultivate in a positive and sustainable way with genetics. Thank you.